On D-Word, we've been lately, well, for 20 years, we've been covering some of the top documentary festivals in the world, everything from IDFA to Hot Docs, Sheffield, Doc NYC. And we were recently starting with CPH Docs a few weeks ago and then following up in Fullframe last week. We decided to start covering it with video rather than just, reporting back on what's being said at the conferences and pitch forums and the like. At Fullframe last week, it was a very different experience because there's very little industry there, practically none. It's really almost like summer camp for filmmakers. I mean, it's 4 days, the films play once. You see upwards of 3 or 4. There was a day I saw 4 films, which is unusual, on the big screen. And you just hang out. Everything's within a block or two of each other. So it's a different experience. I was mostly talking to filmmakers about what makes Fullframe so special. But they're really interesting short videos, so I highly recommend going there. And one of the people I ran into and talked to for a brief interview was this guy named Gary Hustwit. He was just sitting there eating all alone in the Marriott.
And only slightly hungover as well.
So we got to chatting. I said, "Can I interview you?" And then, Eno was playing there the following night, and I was so excited to see it, having read, all about it coming out of Sundance. And then I said, "Hey, do you want to be on one of our Friday face-to-faces?" And he said, "Sure." And we started to think about dates and tying it to, normally we would tie it to the opening of a film, particularly the New York opening, if it was a film forum, it's going to be. But this is not your usual film. And it just made, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to do that. And I just wanted Gary on as soon as possible because, I don't know, I saw it the following night and my expectations were very high, and it just leaped well over them. It was such an exciting event. It was like you were seeing the future of documentary or some new form of art before your very eyes. In the way that he tells, this, you'd say tells the story of Brian Eno, who himself is an incredibly innovative musician, music producer, artist, and does it in a way that marries the form to the content in a way that is kind of mind-blowing. So we will get into that. But Gary's also been at the forefront of artistic innovation for decades, more so than most any other figure I can think of in the documentary world. So I wanted to kind of start at the beginning, and talk about, how this all came about. So out of college, I think you started working at a tel
Yeah,
you
record
with
label.
indie bands, you were promoting
Yeah,
concerts, I think, out of
yeah,
college.
yeah. Well, all my friends in bands were my friends in college were in bands, and I I just interesting back then there was no you couldn't take a music industry major at most colleges in the 80s. It was just a thing that you kind of had to do on your own, and you picked up knowledge just by talking to other people who were doing it and going out and touring or whatever. But all my friends were in bands, and I was I could play guitar, but they were much better than I was. So I ended up being kind of the manager and the concert promoter and I'm booking the tours and when we wanted to release a record or a CD or whatever, then it was just like, okay, well, how do we do that? Let's just figure out how we do it. And it's very much kind of like this DIY aesthetic of independent music. And after I was kicked out of college the second time, I just started doing that as kind of my job. I mean, just again working with bands, and then eventually working for more established independent record labels. I worked for a label called SST, which is kind of this legendary punk rock label in LA. The band Black Flag established, and people like Sonic Youth and the Minutemen, and just all these incredible bands from that time were on that label. So I was doing distribution, and that I think is just the thing that has been a thread through most of what I've done in film too. It's like, all right, we got to get the work out there somehow. How do we do it? All right, let's talk to the record stores. Let's get the bands on tour or whatever. And when I did that for a while, I kind of spun into book publishing because I wrote a book about starting an independent record label. Because at the time there was nothing out there that was really sort of kind of hands-on DIY. Here's how you make a CD. Here's how you get it out. Here's how here's who you have to talk to. So through that, I ended up starting a book publishing company because I self-published the first book. It's called Releasing an Independent Record, and it sold like 50,000 copies just because there was it's pre-internet. There was just no way to get the information. And then people started coming to me with other book ideas, and I started publishing fiction and all kinds of stuff. And this is all in Southern California, where I was living at the time. So at some point, I was like, I got to go to New York. I got to take on the publishing industry. This is in '98, I moved to New York City, and very quickly, this is right the birth of kind of DVD, and when like DVD players were just starting to become more available. And I got my first DVD player, and I had never been like a diehard film, fanatic. I mean, I was definitely into movies, but I didn't go to film school. I didn't have any, desire to be a filmmaker. But something about DVDs, the quality, was better. And just, I don't know, just that time in my life, I just got really into watching films. And the first thing I realized was just like, there was nothing. There was no, in '98, there was just like major studio stuff and like some like public domain classic films and things. There was no, like, Criterion had just started, but there was no, they just started doing DVDs. They'd been doing laser discs before that, but there was no like the corollary of like a cool independent record label releasing DVDs. So I obsessed over that idea for, I don't know, 9 months, and finally just like quit my job and was like, I'm going to start a DVD company. And somehow I convinced this guy named Sean Anderson, who was the head of DVD production at Criterion. He's a young guy, had been there for a long time, to leave Criterion and come start this new thing with me. So we started a company called Plexifilm. We started, trying to, get rights to films to release, and also, things started kind of coming out of the woodwork, independent music projects, stuff like that. And the first thing that sort of landed in our lap was this Wilco documentary called "I'm Trying to Break Your Heart," which my girlfriend at the time, her sister was a huge Wilco fan, and she heard that there was a documentary being made and we should reach out. And at that point, the filmmakers just needed help. They were supposed to be a 3-week shoot, and it ended up going on for 18 months, sort of following the story, shooting on Super 16. And they needed help financing it, distributing it, whatever. So I kind of came on as an executive producer and helped them finish the movie, and then released it, and it did really well. Other projects started coming in. And before, after 2 or 3 years, I had sort of EP or produced like 5 music documentaries. And that was around the time that the first ideas for Helvetica, which was my first film, came about. I've always been kind of a graphic design nerd and had a Mac, very early on, one of the first Macintoshes. So I've always sort of used graphic design for whatever projects I'd done. And at that point, I was like looking around and going, why isn't there a documentary about fonts and graphic design? This is like something that we all use. And, there are amazing designers from the past. And like, I couldn't believe that there wasn't a documentary about it. So I obsessed about that for another like 6 months and finally was like, you know what, I'm just going to do this. And I don't know how to make films. I've watched the process through helping produce these other movies. And yeah, I'll just try to make it. And then that was Helvetica.
So before we get into your filmmaking, which I of course want to do, um, I just want to go back and ask a question. Well, first of all, what were the two reasons you got kicked out of school?
I would just leave. I would just go on tour with my friends' bands,
Ah, okay.
and or just like I wasn't interested in anything. I mean, I was a journalism major because writing is something that comes pretty easy to me, and it was like you needed the least amount of credits to graduate as a journalism major for whatever reason. So I'm like, oh,
Okay.
pick that. But but there was still nothing that was really interesting me in school. I did take an electronic music class back then with like very early modular synthesizers and stuff. That was interesting. But what was happening, out on the road in the, across the country in the mid 80s with independent music was incredible. I mean, there was so many bands crisscrossing the country and college radio. And I mean, it was a really exciting time and tons of independent labels were popping up. And it was just, really fun and something that's what that's what I wanted to do. But there was no way I could do that formally at San
Yeah.
Diego State University, which was where I was going.
So you also had was really interesting to read about. You had a spoken word company that actually got bought out by Salon.com, right? Back when Salon
Yeah,
was like a big deal
a
on
big
the internet,
thing.
and you ultimately
Yeah,
became VP of Salon. What was
yeah.
it like working? I mean, you're so independent. What was it like
Well,
working for a company like that?
so yeah, when I moved to New York, like the first week I was here, I went and saw it because had been publishing books, the reason I came. But I had also been recording authors reading their work or doing, and interviewing them and talking to them. So I had this sort of archive of recordings and knew a lot of other book publishers who were kind of doing the same thing, spoken word scene and all this. So I had all these recordings and I was just like, well, MP3 was a big thing then. It's like the Napster era and everything. So I was like, God, why don't I just like put all these recordings online and just like have them be free? And it's kind of like a literary magazine, but it's in digital audio. So basically, podcasting before there was an iPod. And it got really popular really quickly because people were looking for MP3s and there was just nothing like it. And they were all free, just like come and listen. So then Salon reached out and we ended up basically merging with Salon.com. And through that, I ended up, they wanted to bring all their writers because they had some amazing people and like at the time, like, I don't know, Jake Tapper was just a Salon political writer, and Laura Miller, who's incredible film writer, and Stephanie Zaharek, all this incredible writing talent. But they wanted to bring that to digital audio and do this, so you could stream these things as well as read them. So again, this is pre iPod. So it was working there it was interesting just because it was so many amazing creative people around. It was a weird time because when we did the deal, it was the week that the dot-com 1.0 bubble burst. It was like May of 2000 or whatever. And literally everything, like the stocks, everybody's stock dropped, and everyone's like, "Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we'll get that back." But within 6 months, I had laid off like most of the people that were working with me, who I brought into the company through our thing. So so it was it was fascinating to be part of running a public company at that time, and everything I learned from that side of it. But this is also when I was buying all the DVDs and getting all crazed about film. So that was when the writing was on the wall that the economics of this of the dot-coms at that point weren't working out. That's when I left to start releasing DVDs.
So you started talking about Helvetica, and what the impulse was to start filming it. But that's the first film that I became aware of this new means of distributing your films. That Peter Broderick had been talking about, John Reese, people like that, about collecting, building a fan base,
Yeah.
basically. I mean, you discovered an incredible and I think unexpected fan base in design, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a carryover from the music things that I had done. Um, like even when we released the Wilco film, there was a direct engagement with the fans of the band to like buy the poster or pre-order the DVD or here's the screenings, and just build up a mailing list, and have that relationship. Obviously, it wasn't with us. They wanted to have the relationship with the band, and they were fans of the band. But I guess utilizing the audience to help us finish the film and release the film. So that was always part of, kind of how I did things with independent record labels and, the mailing list. And we're coming to Kansas City, there's the 20 people we know in Kansas City, and we got to let them know. And when I made Helvetica and, premiered it at South by, I think I started a blog, which at the time was like, ooh, a blog, in 2006 when I was finishing the film. And there was just a demand, there was a pent-up demand for that movie and an excitement among the design world for it to come out. Finally, somebody's making a documentary about what we do.
Did
So
you get that from the responses to your blog? Is that where you
yeah,
started
totally,
noticing
totally.
it?
And design conferences and stuff like that. People were just really and design media, like, oh, this movie's coming out called Helvetica with all these, amazing designers in it. So I think that we started selling posters. I commissioned designers who were in the film to make limited edition prints. Actually, two of them are right behind me. That's funny. I just hung those up a few weeks ago. Um, the but and t-shirts and all the kind of stuff that we would do. I don't know if a band was on tour or something, just like merchandising the film. And I think it was pretty amazing because before the film had even come out, I think we had sold like $100,000 worth of merchandise, and gotten a mailing list that was, I don't know, probably like 10 or 15,000 people at that point, and already had screenings booked after South by. I didn't really think about like, oh, someone's going to want to like buy this or acquire this for distribution. I was just like, wow, we got all these people in LA and San Francisco and New York who want to see this. Let's just rent out theaters or do whatever we're going to do to kind of like get it out there. So even when at South by, it was really popular, and like I was getting calls from, like, I don't know, Sony Pictures Classics and Weinstein and people like that, and it was just like there was nothing that they could do. They didn't understand the audience for the film or how to get to the audience for the film, and I already did, and it just didn't make any sense for me, I guess, to be like give it to someone else to do all the distribution when I kind of had it already there. I'd already kind of done distribution. I knew, it's not that complicated. And
Was booking the theaters a job though?
yeah, we booked it into IFC Center, and it was all demand. It was all people reaching out to us. I wasn't going out and pounding the pavement for LA saying, oh, where can we have this? people just wanted to see it, and they found a way, if you were in LA, to pressure the local theater to contact me. It was like all the design associations and all the colleges and everybody who wanted to see the movie. It was really, if you have demand for what the film is, it's easy to figure out how to, then go out and, satisfy that, or figure out a release pattern. It's much harder when you are trying to generate demand for the project, and also trying to do that stuff. So I've been lucky to connect with the audiences, whether it was the music documentaries earlier on, or stuff like Helvetica, or the design films, or even Eno. It's not like I'm sitting around going like, what's an audience I could tap into that would really, support this thing? Like, I am the audience for all these films, whether it's design or music or whatever, stuff that I'm into and that I can't believe there aren't documentaries about, which is why I started making the films. But I'm just making things that I want to watch, and that I know there are other people out there who also probably want to watch them too. That's pretty much it.
Well, you said you're lucky in that, people were doing the work for you in a sense. But what would you advise filmmakers who have been told to tap into their target audience, figure out who that is, and try and tap into them? What can they do to generate that kind of interest, knowing that there probably is that market out there? They just don't know about the film.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a ton of ways. I mean, some of them more sort of organic than others. I gotta say, and as much as I don't like giving money to Zuckerberg or Facebook or Instagram, the targeted boosted posts still work. They actually, like, I can see the metrics. They actually, like, if you're in, if any of you are in, I don't know, San Francisco or LA right now and are into music at all, you've probably seen an Eno, boosted post or story or IG post or whatever for the events that we're doing there. It's super targeted, and it sells tickets. So that's something that I've done on multiple levels. Just that, again, I got a mailing list that has 30,000 people on it. And that, even whatever the social following, whatever it is, good old-fashioned email lists are still the most effective way to get people to do something.
How
So
often do you write on emails when you're
um,
not,
it, it
when you
depends on
don't
what
have a
I'm
film
doing.
coming?
Yeah, sometimes it's like, if I'm not, if the film's in release, I'm doing it maybe once, even as frequently as once a week. If there's new things coming out, and just trying to kind of keep people in the loop. When I'm in production mode, then it's more like, if it's once a month, that's a lot. Once a month, once every couple of months. Um, I always try to not make it like sell, sell, sell every time that it goes out, because that just kind of gets old. So, anytime if you're making a documentary about a certain subject matter, you are now like an expert on that subject matter. And you can tell people about things that are going on in this subject matter that they may want to know. So besides just like being, hey, my thing's opening at blah blah blah, and get the tickets now, there's other things you can kind of talk about there. I always used to be like, when I was researching a film, I was sending like my editors or other members of the team, like, oh, check out this article I saw, like, this is something that, you guys read this. So I kind of sometimes feel like the either social media or the mailing list is sort of an extension of that. Like, they're just one other person that I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. Check this out. And I guess that's part of the, how I guess I've maintained the list and that connection.
Right.
But also, like, it's hard, but man, I'm out there. I go out there, and I'm going to go to 30 cities in the next few months, and do the screenings, and and be there, and make those connections. And it's not like, forced. I don't feel like I'm like, doing anything artificial about it. Like I like all the people who come to my films, because they're people who are interested in the same thing that I'm interested in.
Mhm.
And in a lot of ways, I'm like, I don't really, it's not like, oh, I gotta have a mass audience and get, millions of people watching the thing. I
Right.
don't really care. And I don't care about awards either. I know we're in a space that is so focused on awards. And like, as a member of the Academy, I get on the receiving end of all that stuff.
Me
I
too.
don't I don't care. I don't care. I think all those awards campaigns, all the money that's spent on that, you could spend it on better marketing plans and do things that would
You
be
could give
much
to
more.
Zuckerberg.
Yeah, well, just like exactly, give it to Zuckerberg. It's about sustainability, you know. And I think that the awards and getting your films into Sundance and getting it sold and everything like that, this is like half of 1% of, if best, of all the films that are getting made. So it's kind of a fantasy, it's like
Yeah.
winning the lottery. It's like how do you build a, a, a a business or a career or a community, that's not just dependent on these forces from above who may, deign that you are worthy to be, elevated to their platforms. I think we've ceded so much power to the streamers, in terms of what with the whims of their like shareholders and their stock price, then completely screws the entire market, for independent film. It's We can talk about that. This is I'm digressing, but
No, it's all
but I
interesting.
but I have thoughts, Doug. I have
I,
thoughts.
I have thoughts too. I mean, it's as an Academy voter, it really bothers me that we give out awards, and there's that we give others, we depend on others for validation rather than validating ourselves and
Sure,
getting validation through the work itself.
sure.
And also, how do you compare these films that are so different in style and approach and what they're trying to accomplish? I remember last year, my three favorite documentaries last year were, I think, Moon Age Daydream, Last Journey Home, about going home to see her dying father, and,
Yeah.
and Navalny. I mean, they could not be more three different films. And
Sure.
how do you vote between them?
Yeah.
It's
And
crazy.
yet we're in
Yeah, you do.
this little, like, oh, documentary. It's,
I know.
little
So before we
subject.
move on to Eno, I just want to ask, it seems like you built your email list organically through screenings and selling merchandise and things like that. But I see so many filmmakers put on their website, join my email list, but there's no giveaways, there's no incentive to join the list. I mean, and
Mm.
most people don't like getting emails. What do you advise filmmakers do to lure people to join their email list so they can build it up?
Sorry. My dog is eating something that she shouldn't
Ah,
be.
okay.
Um, yeah, definitely, like, giveaways, special. Yeah, I remember just doing like exclusive clips from a film just for people on the email list, and kind of like, pushing as many people to that as possible. Um, just always be growing your list, and always be growing your network of either supporters or whoever. Like, I feel like we spend a lot of time growing other people's businesses in this
Mhm.
industry, the documentary industry, with our art and with our effort, and not as enough time kind of like growing our own thing or community. Like, I was funny. I went to the Julia Reichert tribute new film that Stephen Wagner had done, and there was a part of it was about the founding of New Day Films and the kind of this collaborative, cooperative kind of idea. And part of me was thinking, oh, well, maybe we need a new day. We need the next generation of that kind of co-op, where it's just like really everyone's in it, and we're not adding to, multi-billion-dollar corporations revenue, but we're kind of like, building our own thing that's really about us as the community and us as the creators of all this stuff. I think we underestimate or undervalue the power that we have as creators. And so much of it is always about, like you said, this sort of external validation, whether that's, distribution or the economic, piece of this or what.
So, Eno, where did it, what was the kernel of the idea? Were you a fan of his going way back?
Sure.
And how did it coincide with this approach to doing it that involved generative AI?
Yeah. Well, I've been a fan of his, for decades, just through the music. And he's produced, and his like kind of approach to creativity with like the oblique strategies cards and the other things, these like tools for creatives, and the music. So I kind of like cold emailed his manager at one point in 2017 and asked if he would do the music for this film that I did about this German designer Dieter Rams. And for what Rams is known for, his like sort of minimalism and his like very kind of like functionalist like design. And I thought that Eno would probably be a kind of an interesting like counterpart to that. So I just reached out, and he wanted to do he was also a fan of Rams and was like, yeah, I'll do the soundtrack. I was like, this is amazing. And it worked out really well. I loved how it worked. We had a good working relationship. It was very easy. And but around that time I was like, hey, why isn't there like a career spanning, all-encompassing documentary about you, Brian? Do you want to do something? And he was like, no, I hate bio documentaries. I hate music documentaries. I don't want to be this. I don't want anyone to tell their version of my story, and also he's very anti talking about the past. He's just very like focused. I think just because journalists, others, fans, whatever, have been asking him about this stuff for 50 plus years, like Bowie and Berlin and, Talking Heads and U2 and all the kind of bands that he's worked with, and Roxy Music, his first band. So I think he's just tired of talking about it and thinks it drags him back creatively. And so that's one of the reasons that he's never done it. But around that time in 2019, I was kind of thinking about, really kind of goes back to the music side of my life, and just like thinking about ways that cinema could be more performative. All of you as filmmakers, or most of you, know, after you've finished the film, like you could watch it a couple times, maybe at premieres or something, but like there's a certain point where you cannot watch the thing anymore. It's like torture. And I was just kind of just like, God, I was going on these screening tours of like, 30, 40, 50 city events or whatever. And just like kind of like pressing play, going to a bar, it's just like coming back. I mean, I couldn't watch the film. And I was thinking, God, I would love to just be able to watch it, and also just be able to be like surprised by it. Like, why can't it be different? Why can't films be different every time that you see them? So that started me thinking about technology and, the way that Eno uses generative technology in his music making, where he's not sitting down and scoring a piece, but he's instead kind of creating like a structure within software where the piece can kind of like make itself and remake itself, setting up these kind of rules and constraints and algorithms that then produce the music and then tweaking that. So I was thinking, well, is there a film version of that? And reached out to a friend of mine who's a digital artist in England named Brendan Dawes, who I've known for a while. He does amazing data visualizations and just like a real super creative thinker. And asked Brendan, hey, could this, I want to make this movie that's different every time, that's assembled in software. Like, can we do it? And he's like, yeah, I think we could. So we started doing the work, and after maybe 6 months, showed Brian a demo of what we'd done. And Brian was blown away. He's like, this is exactly what I want to do. Like,
Wait. Were either of you like programmers, or did you have to?
Brendan, for sure.
Okay.
No, Brendan does this stuff
Okay.
in his sleep. Yeah. No,
All right.
he's the programmer part. I'm the like, could it do that? And then he does it, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. What if we made it do this? And then,
Mhm.
he actually does the coding of it. But and then
But by the way, Gary, I love what you just said, because when you watch Eno at work producing, he's very much like that with the artists he's working with.
yeah, sure. I think he should have or could have been a designer for definitely, just in that way that he's working with other creative people and trying to kind of disrupt or reframe what they're doing to kind of make them look at the problem or the music or the creative work in a different way, and just kind of like, it is very much like what designers do, like in
Right.
industrial design or graphic design or product design. So
And he also talks about, not songs not necessarily happening linearly. They like never happen, people think you
yeah,
just write it down, that you're
yeah,
humming sections of it, you don't know where it fits.
yeah. So like I love all his music and everything, but I'm more interested in the creativity piece of this. So it wasn't like I was gonna make like a master class on creativity with Brian Eno, but I did want it to be something that, even if you like his music, don't like his music, if you're a creative person or you want to be a creative person, you can watch the film and really come away with like actual takeaways and inspiration from it. And I think that's something that the design documentaries have been also about the creative process and watching their creative process, and what can you learn from these designers and artists and architects and stuff. So I think I approached the same way, even though yes, there's a ton of music in it. It still really is about the creativity and trying to kind of decode what he does and what can we learn from it.
Yeah. I've gone so far as to say I think it's the best film on creativity and art I've ever seen, bar
That's
none.
amazing. Thank you,
Um,
Doug. You're wrong, but that's
no, I'm not wrong. I'm not, uh, at least documentary wise, I've not seen anything
Doug,
that
you said it's the Citizen Kane of documentaries,
it
which
is.
a
And
complete hyperbole.
maybe, but I've seen Citizen Kane over at least 30 times, and I could watch Eno at least 30 times. Not because Citizen Kane's going to be different. Actually, I'd love to see Citizen Kane with the scenes
With a
reordered.
generative platform. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that'd
So
be,
that was the idea. It was like, how can we make a film that's different every time, but that still has some arc and some kind of, that feels like a cinematic documentary. Like I didn't want to make like an experimental film, or have it be something that was randomly changing. Like there's a lot of intelligence, like our intelligence as filmmakers, programmed into the system. So it's making the film every time, but there's so much material that we had,
over
um,
500 hours of his
over
own
500 hours of
archive.
his archive, plus all the things we found in other archives, plus all the shooting and interviewing that we did. So like many films that uh, there's way too much material. You got to cut it down. So this is kind of an interesting way to kind of like approach that, where maybe you don't have to cut it all down. You know, if you cut 5 times as many scenes as you could have in a 90-minute film, plus all this other raw stuff, could you? Sorry, my dog is totally tearing up the. she's tearing up the office.
Okay. Okay.
You've got all that material, and then can you arrange a system that can pull from those things and select, you know, a subset of that stuff, but kind of arrange it and present it in a way that works every time as a documentary film.
Well, it's important for people to know you have a beginning and you have a framework of a structure.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not just random, everything being random.
No, I'd say it's probably 30% of the scenes in the film are in every cut, and it's the other 70% that really is totally switchable, and you don't know from cut to cut what you're going to get. So there is a framework there that is, yeah, there's the beginning scene and an end scene, and then key scenes that happen at different points that sort of give it enough of a structure that the other things can kind of group to. If scenes are selected, they will sort of thematically group in different parts of the movie. The other thing is it's all about one person, so you can get away with a lot when scene to scene it's just like, you know, now another Brian scene or another, you know, we can bounce around between time periods. You know, 1973 Brian can have a conversation with 1985 Brian and 2023 Brian. So having it be all about one person sort of definitely helped this like help construct this thing. But I think the idea behind it, like, instead of thinking of a documentary or a film as this rigid, you know, fixed linear piece of media, thinking more about it as a sort of structure. It's like a fluid storytelling structure that is sort of making itself. It's definitely a switch, because we're such control freaks. You know, we're just like every scene we got to do this, and it's frame by frame. You know, you're painstakingly constructing it. And a big challenge for us and for my editors, Maya Tippett and Marley McDonald, who worked on the film, was that challenge. Like, how do you edit a scene if you don't know if it's going to be in the film? You don't know what it's going to be next to, but you still want it to kind of like make sense. Like, how do you construct a narrative that makes sense when you don't know what all the pieces are going to be? It changes the way you edit individual scenes, but then it also changes how you look at story, a story arc, and what the components of a story arc are, and how to kind of creatively make things that will, like, there's personal histories for things, there's creative process things, there's, you know, some music breaks, there's all this kind of these components, these modular sort of scenes in the film, and establishing a rhythm of those things, how they should kind of join together, where they should sort of join together. If this scene comes up, what happens? Like, we have, as you saw, wait, was David Byrne in the cut that you saw?
I think so, yeah.
This is also the problem with the film. There's a lot of that.
Oh yeah,
So,
the ending. He was the one at the end, David
and
Byrne, yeah.
he pulled an oblique strategies card
Yep.
earlier. So there's like a dozen of those with different people
Laurie
pulling,
Anderson, others, yeah.
pulling a card, and depending on what card what gets selected, which card they read, that veers the film off in a different direction. There'll be a response to whatever that card was. So there's all kinds of little things that you can do that I think are cool, and again, make it you know, even at Fullframe, I was just like, I have no idea what comes next. Like, I don't know, like what and you see scenes in different juxtapositions, and you make, as a viewer, you make different connections about the story. There's things that I've been working on this for 5 years. I'm still, if I see a certain arrangement of scenes that I've never seen before, I'm still making new connections and new kind of revelations about Brian and how he's, you know, how his life has worked so far.
It's so funny, talking, about your background and stuff. There's so many parallels with, in terms of his process too, and the way it's not like you plan where your career is going or where your art
Yeah,
takes you or your interest takes you. Kind of roll with it.
yeah, yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. Um,
Um,
and again, he's done so much with kind of technology and creativity. I mean, I have footage from him in 1995, like holding this press conference at his studio and getting journalists in there and on this like, ancient PC telling people this is the future. It's called generative music. And there was, and then, showing like an early demo of a generative music program. So he's been kind of always kind of thinking about the birth of synthesizers. He was just one of the like early pioneers in the use of synths too. So it made sense that this approach for the film and the being the first generative feature film made so much sense to be about him. I mean, I can't think of a better form and meets content. And,
yeah.
and I'm kind of like, how did that happen? I don't know. It sort of just happened, but like that I was having these ideas and I knew him and and found Brendan to kind of do it. I never I always figure this stuff out like years after I do it, but when I'm in the moment doing it, I'm not really thinking about like the bigger picture. Or like, I don't know, again, like can this is an idea, like can we make films that are that where it's less about like absolute control over it and more about like this experimentation and having it change. And do audiences want to see films that change? Like I feel like we were so some ways like when the motion picture came out, we were so blown away of like, oh, it moves. Look, it looks like real life. Oh my God. It's on the train, that we were kind of just sort of, I don't know, just didn't really, we accepted the constraint that it was going to be linear and was going to be exactly the same every time. Like, I feel like when everything went digital 20 whatever plus years ago, that constraint is gone. Film isn't a physical medium anymore. We don't have to thread it through cameras and projectors. So why are we still telling stories the same way cinematically? Mostly, I think it's because we're just used to it. That's where, of
Mhm.
course, the film's going to be, the same every time I watch it. And there is some kind of like comfort slash, nostalgia, whatever, watching the same film again and knowing where those beats are going to be. But I think can we try something different? Can we try, we have the technology now, like can we try to do something interesting with it? And not like, AI generated, video, Sora, etc. I mean, not that that's, I mean, I think that stuff is interesting too. Don't get me wrong. But I think that there are ways to use the technology with actual video and the millions of hours of film that we've already made and going forward in a way that's more about the structural innovation and the storytelling innovation and less about like, oh, let's do something cheaper and easier because we can do it in AI and we couldn't do it, before.
Well, speaking of Sora, I mean, what are your thoughts about generative AI as the way it's being used now, where it threatens to be used in Hollywood, where it threatens, the idea that 8-year-olds can make their own movies with a few text prompts. I mean, are you
Yes.
kind of uh, disturbed by that? I mean, obviously this opens up a lot of creative potential, but, I
Yeah,
mean,
definitely.
consequences.
And seeing it in action, like I'm part of the early access group for Sora, so I've been playing with it for the past like 3 weeks. Um, it is going to change the way the film industry works. No two ways about it. Like I'm going to say that within 2 years, I can't think of a film that I was going to say, I don't know what percentage of films will use technology like this in some form, but it will be like it's what we're seeing even now with this very first generation of this stuff is just amazing. It has issues. It has like kind of relational issues. Like I think I told you the one about the tennis players. I was like doing as a prompt, like two tennis players rallying on a court, and whatever, and it generated a thing with two really totally realistic looking video tennis players, but they were on the same side of the court, hitting to no one. Like there are relational things like, okay, well, yeah, tennis players have to be on two sides of the court that I think will but all that stuff is going to be worked out. Like you can watch the demos of Sora or look at these other Runway or these other text to video generators, and there's stuff that's funny and weird and doesn't look right. In 18 months it's going to look just insane. It will look indistinguishable from real video. So that's when you kind of start thinking, okay, well, if anybody can do a text prompt and generate a convincing looking video, then what do the then what do the people who do this and who have experience like making stories do? I think it's thing you still can't make. There's going to be many incarnations of the technology as it gets more refined and refined. There's no sound in these things. Pretty soon there will be sound, and there will be you'll be able to do the same thing with effects and prompts as you can with images or with text now. So all that stuff's going to change. Yes, we will still need filmmakers and still need people going out, especially documentary, and shooting stuff that is about what's happening in the real world. But certain parts of this industry, industrial films, B-roll animation, are going to get radically disrupted in the next year to 2 years.
Yeah. I see Mark's hand up, folks, and I see a lot of questions in the chat. So if you want to ask them of Gary, I'm not going to ask them for you. Use the raised hand function, and I will call on you. And while you're doing that, I
was going to say one other thing. Like I just did a thing with Sora yesterday where I was like, Portobello Road Market, London, circa 1973. People walking with shopping for outlandish clothes. Something that I would maybe use as a B-roll for an Eno thing, just to kind of test what it would do. And it came out with a pretty convincing looking video of Portobello Road Market circa 1973 with a lot of like scraggly looking hipster Londoners at the time walking through the market. And it was the first thing I was like, whoa, this is actually not, there was nothing weird about it. Like there was nothing like that was relationally wrong, and the video looks great. But it's that kind of stuff, like B-roll that doesn't exist, historical footage of a city circa 1910 or whatever. It actually can make that stuff, and it is decently convincing now. In a year and 2 years it's going to be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine all sorts of use of archival, that can't be done in historical documentaries. I think part of it is it needs to be distinguished as, AI produced. It can't be seen as like footage that you created yourself, but
We're going to get to a point where any video that you see online, you will probably have to assume that it's synthetic. Like 2 to 3 years, pretty much anything you see, it's going to get to that point that it's so good that you can't tell the difference. And then it just becomes like, well, I was trying to think ahead, like, okay, well, where does that leave like filmmaking? And somehow I came back around to like, well, it's about the real world. It's about us going out and showing movies in person and connecting. And there's the authenticity thing is not in question. So in a way, like any technology, there's the benefits, and then suddenly we get the we get the drawbacks to it. Social media or whatever, any digital
I don't want
technology.
to think about the political, nefarious political uses it's going to be used
Oh yeah.
for. Um, One last question. As people are raising their hands, please, folks, use the raised hand function. I'll ask Gary one last question, or if there aren't enough questions, I'll come back. But you mentioned at Full Frame that you're eager to help other filmmakers who might have projects that would be that they would consider using generative AI for. What, how do you see it? I mean, Eno is kind of a natural for that, given it's about one person who had this
Sure.
vast archive, but how could that be used in the kind of more, shall we say, normal documentary?
I think there are a lot of ways you could do it as a kind of like, um, I think if you bake this idea in at the beginning of the project or early on and think about like the different ways to tell a story. Like with Eno, there's the beginning and there's the end. Those are they don't change, but the path changes. And I think there are a lot of I think documentary and fiction stories that you can kind of look at different paths. I mean, I mean, how many scenes do you cut and then not get to use? Not because they're not good, but they don't fit that particular narrative track. Well, you can kind of build alternate tracks or build, like a film that was like a Rashomon thing, but every time you watched it, you were toggling between points of view in a different way. I think there's a lot of ways, and I think part of what I'm excited about is like experimenting with what those could be and getting people who are much more creative than I am to kind of come in and like wrap their brains around it. I keep mentioning Christopher Nolan or whoever like that. But if someone like Christopher Nolan was like, all right, my next film is going to be different every time you watch it, people would completely lose their minds and it would be a huge shift in cinema. So we didn't even get into the distribution of this thing, which is a whole
Right.
other
I will
whole
get back. I'm
other
going to save, no matter what, I'm going to save a few minutes at the end
Okay.
because
But
you're going to have an interesting experience trying to get this on
but
platforms.
part of that was Brendan and I, after Sundance, we launched a startup called Anamorph, which is like just doing more development of the software and the streaming side of it, and collaborating with other filmmakers and studios and streamers to kind of like think about ways that we can use this the technology in bigger projects or other types of projects and see what the possibilities are.
Right. But getting the Netflixes of the world to be able to
Yeah, to
show
be able to,
generative
they don't
stories.
have, they don't have the this technology yet. They need to, not just for deduce things like but I think there's a lot of things you can do with personalization. Like, if you watched a Marvel film that was really just kind of made for you in the moment, I think that there's some cool things that could happen.
Right. All right. Questions. Mark, you're up first. You've been waiting patiently.
I have been. Um, Gary, I was had the opportunity to rent your film Helvetica on Amazon yesterday, and I was talking to my buddy prior to, and I go, I'm going to watch this documentary, 90 minutes on font design. He goes, what? And I go, yeah, it's called Helvetica. He goes, oh, good luck with that. So, so I really enjoyed it, but I want to know what your elevator pitch was when you were getting this off the ground, and when will Eno be in Los Angeles?
Uh,
Thank
uh,
you.
the elevator pitch about Eno.
No, elevator pitch about Helvetica.
Oh, well, luckily I never had to elevator pitch anybody for it, because I think I would have been laughed out of the elevator or the boardroom or whatever it was. Like I made that film just like credit cards and friends and family, and it was my little like geeky side project. I honestly didn't want to be a filmmaker or think that was going to be like a career. I just was like, God, I really want to watch this movie about fonts. Why doesn't anybody make a movie about fonts? And then there were, it was funny because when I released it, it was more successful than everything we had done on Plexifilm in the 4 years prior to that, like combined, basically. And then that was the sort of light bulb of like, oh, I could just make films about stuff that I'm interested in, and like people will watch that and like pay me to do it. That's great. So I didn't have to pitch anybody on that one. And all the films have been similar. I mean, Eno is the first project that I've actually gone out for like private equity investment, just because it was a much bigger project. I mean, the music budget alone is probably more than I spend on Helvetica. So on the whole film of Helvetica. So, but normally it's they've been all sort of self-funded. I did some early kind of crowdfunding Kickstarter stuff for a few of the films, which was great. And yeah, I haven't had to pitch any. I've had to do a lot of elevator pitches on this software company, though. That's a different thing.
So when will I be able to see Eno in Los
Oh,
Angeles?
May 4th, we're doing a one night event at the Alex Theater in Glendale.
Nice.
It's a nice room. It's like, I think it's
And
like
you're going to be there? You're going to do Q&A after and stuff?
Yeah, and for that, like, so the system works two ways. We can either it renders out a ProRes file of the film with a like custom 5.1 audio mix. Like if you imagine all the pieces of media in the system, hundreds of pieces of media, they all have their own 5.1 audio files. So this, our platform basically does all the kind of rearranging, builds transitions between them, and then outputs a full 5.1 mix every single time. So I can just click generate and it's a new film, new 5.1 mix. Or we can do it live, which is what we'll do in Los Angeles and in New York. I'll make the film in real time on stage, and you're using this projector as kind of like a second monitor, basically. That's actually easier doing it at screen res than it is to make a ProRes HQ 5.1 file that's perfect every time, 90 minutes. That was a big lift. The audio is actually a bigger programming lift than the picture, believe it or not.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Mark.
May 4th in LA. If you go to my website, there's all the screenings that are happening.
Thank you.
The chat, it's in the chat. So, Erica.
Hi. So I was also at the Fullframe screening. I'm hoping to go to the DC screening. And I'm just really interested in the business side of this as much as, I'm interested in creativity, obviously, and that's what I love about the film. But just, it seems like exhibitors have had so much trouble getting people back to theaters, particularly, after the pandemic. And so having these kind of live screenings and, opportunities to see something that is different every time. Right now it seems like you're doing a series of one-offs, at different theaters, but is the plan eventually to have it actually have a bigger theatrical release where people may just keep coming to the film for weeks on end?
Yeah, definitely in terms of more sort of an art house kind of theatrical, like, key cities kind of thing, cool theaters and things. I don't know if I'm really supposed to say it or not, but anyway, I told Doug it'll be in the Film Forum starting in mid-July on a kind of standard run where every single screening will be a different version of the film. It's tough because yes, it makes cinema screenings an event, and the audience in the room each time will be the only audience who ever sees that version of the film. It does mean making a ton of DCPs because we're really just rendering out a file from the system, making a DCP of it, or making 20 DCPs of different cuts. So it is a little bit, from a production standpoint, it's a little bit more, theaters are not used to switching DCPs every single screening. And I've gotten pushback from some larger chains who have a centralized system that is really running all the DCPs for all the theaters and using Deluxe or whoever it is, it's hard for them to do, or it's time consuming, or it's expensive for them to do on at scale. So that's the things, part of the things that we're trying to kind of work out with Animorph. I could install a box in the theater, and that just is making it live every time. That we can do it that way too. So it's all these fun technical challenges that we'll that we'll be working through soon. But it is, I will say one thing, and this is, a bigger thing, and like, someone like Sam Green has experimented with this a lot of the live screening, and it is more of an event, and it feels more like a performance. And that brings it kind of also sort of like, oh, it's not a normal movie. So if it's $40, then, oh, okay, that's justified because it's, this live performance thing. So we've been able to do that, sort of raising like all the screenings that we're doing, like the Barbican Hall next weekend, the London premiere. It's like $50 a ticket, and it's almost sold out. So like, I think people are willing to spend a little bit more if it's a special event, and the fact that the film is different every time and there's that uniqueness is part of that too.
Gary, if there are two showings a night at the same theater,
Yeah.
are they playing two separate
Different.
DCPs?
Yeah, they're different.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Christine, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I will be at the New York one for sure.
Great.
I'm just looking to get it. So one little mini question and then a question. Is the Brandon, I got in a little late. So is the Brandon you're talking about Brandon Oldenburg?
No, Brendan Dawes is his name.
Brendan, okay, because anyway, he's someone that was in this space decades ago. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about the editing process, the sourcing of all the images, yours versus other versus whatever, and then just the process in general. And it looks just amazing.
Yeah, thanks. The editing process is not that much different from a traditional, documentary editing process, in terms of like, we're cutting tons of scenes. We're going through, 500 hours of archive that we had to digitize, restore, catalog, and then all the new, the new interviews. I went back and forth to England for a couple of years, filming with Brian, just watching him, do talks, or in the studio, or whatever. So, not that much different, really, from any other film that I've done, except there's more material. There's a lot more material, because part of this is that you're making, like I said, 5 times as much material as scenes that you'd use in a normal.
That's where I'm sort of headed with my question is,
Yeah.
to these different, it's almost like, a symphony, or arranging a symphony or something,
Yeah.
with all the different storylines and
Yeah.
all the images. Just in terms of the content, the sheer content.
Yeah, there's more, and the music rights and everything else. Because like, it's weird. We're having to, like, for music, for instance, we're having to license music that isn't in every version of the film, is maybe only in every 10 versions of the film that scene might come up. So it is a little bit different. Luckily, like, Brian being completely, behind the project and involved, like, we're getting a lot of goodwill from the from the music licensing world. But yeah, it does open up a lot of things. What's also interesting, like, the about the editing process with this, is that it doesn't have to end. Like, between Sundance and CPH, we added another 20 scenes to the mix. You just put them into the system, and when they're going to get pulled up, they might get pulled up. So you can keep evolving. Somebody sends me a cease and desist about something, I'll just pull it out, and doesn't make or break the film, because it's being made fresh every time. But you can continue to add new things, to change different scenes. It's never locked. There's no locked version, as much as like the streamers of the world would like me to just do a locked version.
Gary, can you talk for a second about the Venice Biennale and the version you
Oh,
showed
yeah.
there.
Yeah, that was a different kind of version of the software. In October at the Venice Biennale, we did a thing where we kind of took all the rules off and just let the software just dig into Brian's entire music catalog and all the footage and just go crazy, just make a movie. And it was a 168-hour long film, and not a loop, like an actual just generative new film. Didn't repeat for 168 hours. And it was much more of a kind of like video art installation thing. It wasn't something that you would sit and watch, but people came and hung out for, hours, just kind of like, because you never knew what was going to be next. And we didn't know what was going to be next. And what was, what also interesting was like, it was, the venue was only open from like 10 to 7, but the film was still being made overnight. And we couldn't record it because it was too big of an output. So we kept obsessing over like, what is it making in the middle of the night when no one is there? Like,
Except the night guard had a really good.
Well, I don't know. It's like, is it created? There was no guards. It's like they shut everything down, but except for the projection and the thing. So it's like, what is it? What movie is it making that we'll never ever see? So that was fun. But actually, we're going to be doing other incarnations of that thing, which was called Nothing Can Ever Be the Same. That was the name of that piece. But we're evolving that too, and we'll do some other kind of more museum gallery-ish type installations of that work too. And then, I mean, this is about, what are the possibilities? Like, you can use the software in a ton of different ways. Like, what are the other projects that we can do that, whether they're video art or whether they're blockbuster films and everything in between, there are ways to sort of use this tool.
Great. Philip.
Yeah, Gary, I just wanted to thank you for all your films, and your career have been such a huge inspiration for me. I mean, every bit as much as what Eno is as well. I
Thanks,
mean, you exist in this, intersection, or you play in this intersection between technology and art, which to me is the coolest thing, and is not really common. It's exceedingly rare in documentaries. In features, you get a little bit more of that because there's a lot of technology used there, but your stories and just the people you celebrate, it's like incredible. I'm making a documentary now. I've been working on it for a while, about a documentary about the video game Myst.
Oh, cool.
Totally inspired by your
Amazing.
You
love it. I want to watch it.
Awesome. Oh, I'd love to talk to you more about it. Speaking of which, can you talk a little bit more about Anamorph? And are you still looking for collaborators or filmmakers or anything? What's happening with that?
Yeah, I mean, we're just in like the seed funding round. We're talking to a lot of different studios and other potential partners with it. Already had to turn down a few projects that just weren't couldn't really do them in the time constraints. But yeah, no, I think it's just again, this it's like a laboratory, basically. It's like a laboratory to explore ideas of bringing this sort of technology into filmmaking, but in a filmmaker focused way. Again, it's not trying to do something cheaper and faster, using technology. It's trying to kind of bring a capability that didn't exist before. So we're enabling something here that is part of that, hopefully will be an interesting creative direction. But yeah, no, so we're just like talking to people right now, talking to the possibilities. Like I do want to make, or help make like a major film. Oh my God, sorry. Super. There are definitely some filmmakers who I think have played with chronology and structure and nonlinearity in their films before, but I think that I'd love to kind of see what the possibilities are of the technology are again. And like I was saying, in a filmmaker friendly way, I have nothing against Silicon Valley, but I think I'd rather have filmmakers kind of involved in the sort of direction of some of this software versus pure tech.
Great. Jim, you're up.
I'm glad you want filmmakers to be in control of this. As a person who's worked in high tech for way too long, that's not a good place for this. Anyway, I see this more as a band on tour, and it's going to generate lots and lots of discussion about, did you see this performance? Did you see that performance? And because the connections of ideas are going to be amazing. And so on a practical level, I've got a friend who's a designer. And so my question is, should we go see different screenings and then talk about it, or go to the same screening and then talk about it? I don't know. I have a practical question though. It was like most bands on tour, at some point the tour is going to end. And presumably we'll have multiple recordings of multiple, the Atlanta show, the Seattle show, the LA show, the other LA show. At what point do you and Brian just say, we've got other projects, we're moving on? What happens to this at that point?
Yeah. Again, I think there's an online incarnation of this idea that is, ideally, it's every person who's watching it is getting a unique version of it, just that only they're going to see. Whether that's done within the framework of one of the major streamers, or whether that's kind of like its own thing that's a web-based or app-based idea, will remain to be seen. Like, we're sort of trying to develop that technology and kind of figure out what the kind of highest use of a digital release is. Like, the last resort is like a director's cut kind of thing. But I'm just trying to resist, like, why do we have to kind of dumb down the idea for a legacy technology that needs to be, innovated anyway? So yeah, we can do the screenings all day long, which is great. I mean, I can go out and show it, and it's super fun to show it to people. And as long as I can, like, deal with the travel, I'll be out there, like, screening it. And in the meantime, we're developing the technology for then a streaming kind of release. When we're doing the live screenings, like what I was playing just now was, it was a test for that I was doing before our London show. But when we're doing the live screenings, like in London and New York and in LA and San Francisco and Chicago coming up, we're not recording it. It's live. It's ephemeral. Like, I have a kind of like a metadata, like, blueprint of it in text, but we're just making it in the moment, and it is just for that audience. And I kind of like the ephemeral part of that. You got to be there, you got to be in the room, and you're sharing it with a group of people. So I would say go with a person that you want to talk about that version. Again, there are parts that are the same. It's all about Brian. You're going to take away something interesting from any version that you see. But if you want to talk about specific scenes, you should probably go with that person to see one version.
It's a good thing you're not excited about Academy Award consideration, because you would have to submit a version
Oh, I
that
can't
would go on
even.
the portal.
How do you review a movie that's different every time? Like, all the Sundance reviews are like, it's great, but caveat, I saw this, some of the scenes I'm mentioning are not going to be in your version. But it is like a concert. You review the concert you went to. I saw the band in Boston on March 12th. Like, that's I think kind of what it is like. But it's not, from the making side and the exhibiting side and the reviewing side, it scrambles a lot of rules here.
Yeah, to me, the comparison only goes so far, because most bands don't change their playlists so radically from, performance to performance on tour.
Some bands do. I don't know. But at least they can change. They can change the words. They can extend a section. They can,
Right. Right. Danny, then Adam, and then I think we'll wrap things up. Thanks for staying a few minutes longer. Gary, I think we're going to go past our 1:30 if you don't mind too much.
Yeah, no worries.
Hey, Gary, it's Danny here in
Danny.
Seattle. Two quick questions. Number one, do you know who's seen it the most? How many times? Besides you?
Besides our team,
Yeah.
there were people who came back at Sundance because there were 6 screenings of it at Sundance that were all different. So there were people at Sundance who came back and saw 2, maybe 3. But it was just kind of random people that I don't know. They just came up afterwards and were saying like, "Oh, I saw the other ones." They're all
Okay.
version stamps. Like they all have a generation number. We're on like 2.6 now. So everybody's like, "Yeah, I saw 1.1, the first one." Yeah, it's been interesting because we've only shown it at Sundance, at CPH Docs, and at Fullframe now. So it's a total of 10 public screenings. So I think people, there are maybe three timers, but yeah.
Got it.
I'm totally fostering this, like, Grateful Dead on the road kind of thing. Like, how many versions of the film can you see?
Yeah, totally. That's exactly where my mind is going too. It's like I had visions. I didn't know there were only 10 public screenings, apologies. But I had visions of people, texting or emailing you. I've seen it for the 31st time and this is what I'm taking away.
Well, somebody asked me, like, how many times did you have to watch it to see everything? And I don't have an answer for that. I'm not sure what the math is, but it's definitely more than 10 times. But at a certain point, you're going to see most of the core stuff, but certain things won't pop up. The math involved is crazy,
Right.
Again, like it's like the lottery. It's like a pick 6 kind of thing. If
that was my second question. Oh, I'm sorry. My second question is more about your motivation in, or maybe your ideal about what's happening in a viewer who sees it multiple times. In that, like you mentioned, Rashomon, right? You see these different points of view. Is it that the viewer would, and I know that there's not an either or, but is it that the viewer would come away with simply a more textured version of this personality, or are there substantive pieces of information that you're going to be?
Yeah. There's definitely substantive pieces of information. You're going to get a different kind of picture. It's like a composite portrait of the subject, each version that you see. And again, I've always liked films where the audience has to kind of make their own connections. I'm not like, telling them, like, making the connections for them. And it does sort of encourage or require a more active sense of watching. If you're having to kind of, there can be a little bit of confusion, and I think that confusion is good sometimes. It's not all about making something as clear as it could possibly be in your story. Sometimes getting people to be a little bit confused and to have to think about the connections is a good thing. And it also, our brains are, attuned to like figuring out the puzzle and seeing the patterns and stuff. And there's a little something, I think, gratifying when you figure it out, even if it's in a little micro way, scene to scene. So I like that idea of that the audience is bringing something to the story. They're making the connections, and the connections are different every time. Like I mentioned, even with me, I'm seeing connections I'm making new connections that from 5 years of watching all the footage I never made before, just because of the juxtaposition or the scene. Hey, I got to plug keep going, but I got to plug in my computer.
Can you hear the question though, Gary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I just had to plug in.
Okay, before we get to the question, I was just thinking, when you're done, you're ready to sign up, go on to your next project. Your final act is you put all of the footage, all of the scenes onto like 5 different flash drives, and you sell them each for $1 million.
Brendan Dawes, my collaborator, and I wants to do that. Put all the footage and all the inclinations on 5 different flash drives and take them to an island and burn them. That's this idea. Well, you'll see. So we made a machine that'll be making its debut in London next week. that makes the movie. And it's like a kind of a, it's well, you'll have to see it. I can't really describe it, but it's a bespoke piece of hardware that actually like will be like on stage / front of house, like actually creating the film. It's the thing that we're using to make it, but it's never been seen, but it's like something that you've never seen before. So
Somebody,
that we could sell maybe for $1 million with the
okay.
film.
Somebody had their hand up, and I had raised it. I don't see it. Okay, Adam.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Great work, Gary. You know, I've been following your career for a long time, and have shown some of your works previously. I used to program in Seattle. I'm curious, I guess, a little bit about the process and how the algorithm works. So I'm wondering if there's any taxonomy in how that algorithm works, some sort of classification process that might normally be part of like the pre-production process a doc filmmaker might do
Yeah.
when they're reviewing the material. And then I have a follow-up question that's unrelated to that, and that just has to do with kind of antecedents in the creative world, like specifically, you know, Chance Operations, let's say, by John Cage and Merce Cunningham, and how much you were thinking about those antecedents when you were creating this work.
Yeah, no, there are definitely precedents for this kind of idea. And Brian Eno is definitely one of the people who has been a proponent of it for many years, and Cage and some of the kind of early avant-garde composers. So it was all kind of factored in, and we also like used Eno's oblique strategies cards like during the process of making the film too. And yeah, it's a very, very again, the programming part, but also the editing part of piece of it, all the sort of metadata and the algorithms that we created for it. It was a lot of trial and error and just seeing what worked and what made sense. And also, you know, it's an emotional taxonomy. You know, it's like emotional tagging. It's not just like, well, it's Brian and he's in the studio and he's playing the keyboard. He's talking about this subject, this subject, this subject. Part of it is like really sort of kind of getting to the sort of emotional or the creative content of that, and figuring out interesting ways for that to kind of connect with other things. And also leaving enough of a random seed in there. There is like a random seed in the algorithm, which is just like this thing that, Brendan, I think a lot of it is about the time of day that it gets that version of the film gets generated, or also the geographical location that has a effect on the outcome. So there's all sorts of like factors in here. And people always ask like, oh, well, could you just do it like, we can adjust it any way we want. We can be like newer Brian, earlier Brian, more talking, more music. You can skew the outcome. How we landed on what we're showing now is that like, does it feel like a satisfying movie to watch? We can make it much more different every cut, or less different, or whatever. But a lot of it was kind of subjective as like filmmakers going like, does this work? Like no matter what scenes you see, does it still like feel like a inspiring cinematic, documentary? So it was, again, a lot of trial and error, a lot of back and forth it was fascinating seeing our editors, who were very much about control, very much about controlling every aspect of it. And then Brendan is just like, oh, take it all off. He's from Liverpool, so he sounds like one of the Beatles, but take it all off, let it all be random, just like let it go. We don't have to explain anything to anyone, just do it. And me in the middle as a director, my role was kind of like somehow mediating these two things, like, Brendan as an artist and Marley and Maya as editors, And that somehow that tension is actually kind of, I think, reflected in the final process too, the final product.
Just one final question, Gary, before we leave, and thank you for all this and for taking the extra
Oh,
time.
my pleasure.
We want to talk about distribution and documentary and where we're at with that now. I mean, you're doing something so innovative. It almost is its own form. People have talked about it being almost like performance art or touring bands or whatever. And it's clearly not it's an inspiration. I'm not sure it's a model for the normal documentary filmmaker. What are your thoughts? What advice or whatever do you have to us normies that are, trying to get our films out and seen? There's so much clutter out there. There's so much content. There's streaming. There's TikTok. I mean, what if you were starting out and making a normal documentary? What would you do?
That's a good question. I think I would see, like, I can only judge from like my experience in I'm making things for me, really. Like, I'm the audience here. There are a lot of inspirational stories in the world and a lot of amazing filmmaking being done in the world. Like, I know what I want to see, and I'm kind of just like focusing on that. So somehow, like, the outreach and even just talking to people about it or whatever, like, I'm like a fan of the movie, even though I'm like the maker of the movie, because really I'm a fan of the subject matter and the idea behind it. And I think everything I do somehow comes across like that. Like, I'm another one of the fans of Brian Eno. And I got to make this film about him, but I talk about him just like, as a subject, like and I evangelize about it to anybody anyone I meet. So I think it's, again, not, it's like I don't sit and go, God, what thing could I make a documentary about that's going to have a lot of people who come? But I have a lot of different ideas for films, and sometimes I do think, well, like, if the film is showing and it's raining and people are having to line up in the rain at whatever, stand in line for a half hour in the rain, like, what would make me go out and stand in the rain for a half hour to see? Like, what is so important to me that I would go out and do that? And for anyone, like, would go out and do that. And if it doesn't kind of pass the stand in the rain test, I tend to gravitate towards the ones that pass that test, because it for me, it's gotta like make me that excited and that passionate about seeing it. For even to make it, it's got to make me that passionate. I mean, we're all of us, we're spending like years working on these things, and we've got to, you have to be passionate about it. And I'm still talking about Helvetica. It's like 17 years ago that thing came out. So, I tend to just let the obsession and the passion follow, what dictate the direction. That's been my process, and that's not necessarily everybody else's process.
Yeah.
I think it's a really hard time right now because, again, part of what we were mentioning before about giving these corporations so much control over what gets seen, and also the way it's skewed the audience's relationship to film and to documentary. 95% of the population does not care. They care just they're going to get home from work and they're going to pop on Hulu, and whatever's on Hulu is what they're going to watch. They don't really give a shit about independent documentaries or dependent whatever. It doesn't. They're not invested in the process. It doesn't mean anything to them. And I think part of like what's missing is that connection. There is no acknowledgement or knowledge of the people who are making these things and what the differences are between you know, massive, I don't know, you know, Netflix original or whatever, or the little film that you crafted because you just loved it and you spent $50,000 and cobbled it together and made it. I don't think enough people appreciate that difference now, or realize that there is a difference, or that there is this whole you know, world of like filmmakers who are, you know, making these things just because they love them. So maybe we're like not telling the right stories about what we do to the bigger the bigger audience of you know, filmmakers or film watchers, or the population in general. I don't know, but we've definitely let the conversation be dictated by like what gets bought, what's on, you know, what's on the premiering on, you know, HBO, whatever it is, like, and less about like how do we make a sustainable, supportive community, and also like, you know, get the films out there to audiences, but still are able to pay the, you know, the rent. There is a solution in there, and it's funny enough. Like when I went to Fullframe, it's all there. You know, all the pieces to this puzzle are here, in our community with other filmmakers. But so often it's still just about like, oh, did it sell? Oh, it didn't sell. Wow, gosh, you're a failure because, you know, of all the films at Sundance, like a tiny percentage of them actually like got deals, but the other ones aren't failures. So they're amazing. They're amazing films, especially in the documentary.
You know, it's the way, the times we live in and the way the media covers this. You know, ever since they started announcing box office figures every Monday, you know, and every movie became
Production
about
budget.
yeah, who did what in the box office.
Yeah.
You know, we talked earlier about Academy Awards, you know, the ones that don't win in the end, even if they're shortlisted or nominated, are considered losers because they didn't win. You know,
Yeah, totally.
it's just a
Well,
crazy
again, all those like
ecosystem.
whatever 20 documentaries at Sundance, and 15 of them are still didn't get sold. Okay,
Yeah.
well, those are failures now. Like they're amazing films. Just because they don't check a box at one of these handful of corporations, like what they feel like, what their data is showing them people want. I mean, it's a messed up system that we've sort of like gone willingly into because there was so much money being thrown around 4 or 5 years ago, that then we're at the mercy of when it goes away. Suddenly everybody's like, oh, the industry's in crisis. Like the industry is not in crisis. Like we're still making incredible films, you know, as creators of this stuff. Like we're not in crisis. The handful of you know, of multi-billion-dollar corporations that have these, you know, they're actually not even film companies. They're subscription software companies, basically. They're the ones that are kind of dictating that. And I feel like yeah, there needs to be like a pivot in the way we approach those companies, and also their responsibility. You know, I think we talked about this. I'm like, why weren't all those companies at Fullframe chipping in $50,000, giving any care about the future of documentary filmmaking? Do they care about the future of documentary filmmaking?
I don't think they do. Or they'd be doing it, Garrett. You know, I mean, they have the money, but like,
Yeah,
don't have the power to spend the money. You know, the ones who do care, I don't think. You know, I think of somebody like Molly Thompson at Apple, you know, or Matt Dentler at Apple. These are like cineasts. I mean, they are like fierce advocates, and they know good films when they see it.
They're
They
in
don't
the
have the
belly. They're in
yeah,
the
they don't
belly.
have the
They're in the belly of the beast now.
yeah,
You know.
they don't have the power to spend the money. I don't
Yeah,
even
I
know if they
know,
can
but
advocate, you know, go
yeah.
up to their bosses and advocate for it. You know, it's just we have to figure out. I mean, one of the many things I appreciate about your film is it's going to draw people back into theaters and into seeing documentaries in theaters. very few documentaries can do that these days. And we have to figure out, okay, what are other avenues to get at, get people to watch? What devices are
Sure.
they going to be seeing them on? And how do they know about it? How do we even get them aware of it?
Yeah.
That
I
seems
mean,
the
it's hard.
challenge.
It's hard, yeah, because there's so much distraction and so much
Right.
clutter.
And we're trained to think, okay, success is winning an Oscar or being nominated. So we
Yeah.
have to get out of that attitude of,
Yeah.
these traditional notions of what success is and what validation is. Because if we don't get into theaters, you're not even going to get reviewed by the major critics. So,
Yeah.
you
No,
have to, yeah.
it's hard work. And even like, at whatever level that like I've been to kind of sustain this for 20 years, it's hard. It's not like, oh, it's like I'm, on easy street because I made a couple, design films that people liked. It's still really hard. So I think there are ways to kind of like break it down into very kind of basic, small actions where you're really thinking about let's do a one screening. Think about why are those people going to come? How can I like get them excited about this thing? How can I get them to talk about it with other people? And all your sort of social media and all your outreach and all this kind of stuff is really about that. It's about community building of people who are interested in the same things that you are or interested in this subject. Like part of how I've done this is that there's a crossover, and well, again, it's not intentional, but it's because I've been making films that I wanted to watch or it's subjects that I want to see. There's a crossover of those audiences. I think it's much harder if you are doing films that from one film to the other, the stories are and subject matter are not connected. You are the connection as a filmmaker. Then it is about your storytelling and your intelligence and getting people to kind of like, you know, recognize and buy in and want to follow along with whatever your next thing is. But it is work. I mean, I'm sitting here amongst like boxes of like posters and stuff that need to be, rolled up and sent out before I head to England. So
All about the merch.
it's all about the merch. And that's funny. I've helped
That's
people
the
think
future of
about,
documentary, the merch.
no, it's like you come on, this is about streams, it's about multiple streams. Like I don't know, a lot of times I don't know what's going to come in next month, but I know there's enough out there that I've sort of put out there, like there's going to be a canopy thing, and there's going to be a Japanese screening, and there's going to be, something. It's all sort of cobbles together to make something that's,
Mhm.
somewhat sustainable, but I still have my doubts on that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. People I'll tell you like, oh well, your films, they're like, oh it's easy to do merch for those because my film is about, I don't whatever prison and whatever I can't do merch for it. You could make a artful, really well done screen print about a Holocaust film if you wanted to, and that people would want to put on their walls or whatever. It's not about necessarily. There's ways to respectfully treat each subject in a poster or in something that that you could. It's a way for people to support you. I feel like it's not like about like, oh, let's make a lot of money on posters. It's like, let's give the people who watch these films and who care about these subjects another way to like be involved and to help us make the films.
Yep.
Um,
On that note, thank you, Gary. I,
uh,
I I'm such a fan of your work. You're such an inspiration, I mean, to so many of us. And I can't, obviously can't say enough about Eno. So good luck with that. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks. Yeah, and I hope some of the people on this Zoom can go see it. There's like a dozen screenings that are special screenings that I'll be doing in the next month, and then more sort of small cinema runs and things like that. And then we'll figure out what the digital piece to this is later in the year. But yeah, thanks for having me.